So there's this application called CCleaner, and lots of people use it to maintain their computers, clean up junk, and apparently they got compromised, and the official copies of CCleaner that were being distributed had malware baked into them.
Hey Matt, I was hearing about a lot of chatter about the CCleaner tool and how it's been infected. Do you want to talk a little more about what you've been hearing?
Yeah, so this one is pretty interesting. So CCleaner is a pretty well-known tool. I know a lot of folks actually use it on their own machines, and it's meant to sort of clean up the crud on your machine, remove unneeded configuration stuff. Mm-hmm. And the Cisco Talos team discovered that a recent version of CCleaner, as of like August 15th, was being distributed with malware built into it.
Wow.
So, and the interesting part about it is that it's not just like someone managed to find their FTP server and like combine the malware as part of it. This was part of the build process. So
wow.
They signed that entire bundle of regular software plus malware properly. So if you run on your computer, the reason that you sign software is to prove that it's a legitimate piece of software.
Sure.
And it bypasses that completely. So the good thing is Avast, who owns the company that creates this, has gone ahead. They've released a statement saying, the servers that were hosting it are cleaned up. We've pushed a brand new version to the people who can get updates. Mm-hmm. That doesn't apply to everybody. I think the free version still doesn't automatically update. So if you're a user of CCleaner, it's definitely time to check what version you're running.
Yeah.
It's pretty unusual. I mean, people have been bundling malware with regular software for a while, or advertising that their malware is that same software, but having the actual functional software run and a signed copy, which is supposed to prove that this came from the people you expect it to come from and is trustworthy, subverting that is a big deal. But it seems like it's been mostly contained, I would say, at this point. They did a really good job, Talos, of writing up the malware and how it works. Like a really nice analysis of how I think it's a DLL that gets packaged inside of it, how that actually operates, how it calls home, how the domain generation algorithm works. Okay. So if you're somebody who hunts for this sort of stuff on the network and you're not sure if it's in your environment, there's plenty of stuff to look for to try and find it as well.
Great. And it's a popular tool, right? So I saw here that it's about 2 million downloads since it's been infected, that's happened. Yeah. So as an end user, I think we'd all want to just make sure if you're using it, have the updated version with the patch installed. Yeah.
Absolutely, that's the right way to go. Okay. Although it raises questions about, everything that we do to keep the software ecosystem clean and sane, bypassing code signing is a big deal. And this would be exactly how you do it if you were an attacker. I'm not sure what to say besides keep an eye on your build environment as a developer if you are someone who produces software for other people.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to see how the hacker techniques have changed, and now you're attacking the software supplier itself. We always talk about end users and organizations using the software. Now you're attacking the provider of the software. And we talk about application security in the SDLC phase, which is in the whole development process. It becomes critical now, right?
Yeah, definitely. What do you think, Jim?
I thought it was interesting that they managed to get it into the installer there. So, it isn't like the CCleaner application itself was infected, but this DLL got installed by the installer when you were installing CCleaner. So, folks need to absolutely keep track of their build environments and make sure that those are isolated and clean, because if the bad guys can get in there, they can hide their malware just about anywhere.
Okay, so I think we've got the lessons learned there. Keep security in mind through the build process, and of course, make sure that you have the most latest up-to-date, software, and definitely look for it.
Absolutely.
So it's not post-installation where you have the user click on a malware and then download things. This is part of the package in terms of install. So it is unique to see that it's gone all the way up the chain in terms of attacking the software supplier itself.
So Jim, if you follow the cryptocurrency markets, things have been like a roller coaster recently. But I think the upshot of that is that people are much more interested in making this kind of money, and not always in above board means. So I think you've got a pretty cool story about that.
This was a story in ESET's We Live Security blog. And it was, I've done a number of cases over the years that involved cryptocurrency miners being planted on various devices, on Linux servers, on IoT devices. This one was a little different. In this campaign, it's actually, the cryptocurrency miners are actually in JavaScript, and so this JavaScript is being injected on websites to get folks to run the miner inside their web browser. They tracked a couple of sites that were doing a lot of this through malvertising.
Now, that's something I've always had a problem with, is that people who are providing ads on websites aren't always vetting what's being pushed to somebody's browser. And we've seen malware delivered this way. You can also load JavaScript in somebody's browser as part of this ad package, and somebody can mine cryptocurrency using that. If ads were only allowed to be static images and there was some way to enforce that, I think the internet ecosystem would be a lot safer for web users.
And they were particularly aiming at streaming video sites or web gaming sites.
I can see why.
Cryptocurrency mining is a CPU-intensive activity. So if they can hide it inside websites that are going to, A, stay connected for a long period of time, and B, already have some additional CPU overhead where they might not get noticed.
It's going to go into the gaming sites and streaming sites where this is where you'll be impacted. So while you're browsing, in the background it's using your CPU's power to go and mine currency, and you're making money for somebody else.
It's a way of making money with your computer in very basic terms. And using somebody else's computer to do this means you're not paying for the power or the CPU cycles, and you're just getting the benefit out of it, which is why malware authors have been doing this for a while.
This isn't the first time that folks have tried to do this via JavaScript, but it is one of the larger instances of this type of attack. They're also going after three particular cryptocurrencies, not Bitcoin, which is the big one, the most well-known one. They're going after Feathercoin, Litecoin, and Monero. And they're doing this because these are less CPU intensive. They don't require the specialized hardware, so it's possible to actually do some reasonable computation inside of a web browser.
That's interesting. Monero has a kind of a reputation around criminal activity these days as well. I'm sure there are legit uses of it, but Monero is designed to be more of a privacy-protecting currency, so you can mine it and profit from that mining a little more anonymously than you can with things like Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think what is interesting to see is, although cryptocurrency and mining has been around for some time, the way they've actually taken it to target users of gaming websites or streaming, so that population typically may not really think about security and think about what they're downloading. And most often than not, most websites will say, oh, you need to run Java to be able to show you this content, and you're going to be like, okay, click X, okay, let's go on, right? I think they're really going after also to not be noticed. So there's strategy behind how they implemented this one.
So Bindu, I've been hearing a lot about this BlueBorne Bluetooth vulnerability. I understand you were doing some research on that?
Yes, this was an interesting one, right? So far, when we talk about security techniques and attacks, right, we expect a user to click on a malicious link, download something. For this one, you don't need to be connected to the internet at all. You could have a device, any device that has Bluetooth activated, which means it's on even though you're not using it. This is exploiting a vulnerability, 8 of those, mainly around remote code execution as well as information leak. And it spreads sort of worm-like, malware-like. BlueBorne is basically a clickless attack pattern on Bluetooth. And for this one, you don't need to be on the internet. You don't need to be paired with a Bluetooth device. As long as you have Bluetooth on,
you could walk past somebody with a malicious device that's using this vulnerability against you, and you'd never know. And you wouldn't have to take any action. It would just happen to your device.
You have, let's say, a delivery shipment guy coming into a large financial institution doing deliveries. His device is infected. So then anybody that has a Bluetooth on any device, it could be the cameras, it could be any other devices, phones, computers, all of those would be infected. Then he moves on, he goes and drops the shipment at another location, they get infected. So really this is like an airborne virus, if you will.
I don't think there's any evidence yet that this has been seen in the wild. I think that most users will be all right, although I worry a little bit about asking people to be the first person to get exploited about, in one of these situations.
Most of us keep our Bluetooth on, whether we use it or not. And I don't think this is about, Bluetooth itself being insecure as much as it is about when services are not needed, you don't want to, keep them on. And also for the fact that your chip manufacturers need to play an important role in terms of doing patches for you and really going into making sure that all of these IoT devices pretty much have Bluetooth on typically by default. Right?
So is this a problem at the protocol design level? Is this the implementation or the chip manufacturer?
It is not at the protocol design level. It is at the implementation level, at the chip design level. And it's been patched, the patches are out, but except for Linux as the operating system, they haven't put out a patch for this one yet. So
I thought Android actually had put out, and iOS. Did you read any different, Jim?
I know that Google has released it, whether it's been pushed to all the devices.
Yeah, and so, again, this is going back to the fact that this itself can be used later on to install malicious malware, to ransomware, used in a larger sort of Mirai sort of an attack. So this vulnerability today does not have as much of an impact as it would if it's going to get deeper, right? So, if they can remotely execute code on your phone, if they can steal information, if they can manipulate your cameras to take pictures and start, getting that information, can they also then install malware, make you click on a ransomware through an email that they're sending to you? Will your device now be part of a larger attack?
Wide variety of devices that actually run Bluetooth. It's you can your cameras. You kind of mentioned that. Your cars, your watch. Are all of those getting the updates they need to be protected? I honestly don't know if my watch has gotten the update yet.
You think about the number of devices that are being impacted. Healthcare, I've started hearing from a number of healthcare organizations where most of these medical equipment come with Bluetooth, and usually it's turned on by default. Nobody shuts it off. So things like that are going to be impacted.
Interesting. I guess what I would be most interested in seeing is if people find that this is being used in the wild, what malware is being designed for it and pushed out. Because even if the vulnerability exists on multiple platforms, the chances they're going to develop malware for each of those platforms, I think, is fairly low.
Yes.
So I would want to see what platforms are actually being infected if I were to have any sort of response to this at this point. Because I think most folks will think, what can I do besides turn off my phone or disable the Bluetooth on my, my smartwatch or things like that. So
at this point, I would think the probability of exploits being developed to target this is lower, but I think it's again going back to the point that people might think about it that way and not patch, right? Yeah. So later on, we might see something being developed, right?
I think you're right. We might have to watch this one for a very long time. Yeah. If you're not using your Bluetooth radio, turn it off. That should be 1 or 2 clicks within a mobile app environment. Or if you're using it on a laptop, it should be just as easy.
Like we always say, don't keep services running that you don't use often. Take an inventory of all of the devices that you pretty much use that have Bluetooth by default turned on. Turn it off and make sure you also patch.
All right, so let's go into the internet weather for this week. This is the top 10 most probe ports in the last 7 days. The top 3 most probe ports haven't changed this past week. So that's 23 TCP, which is Telnet, old friend. 22, which is SSH. And then 1433 is MS SQL. That's still up the top. I mean, it's still incredible. I mean, the other section I can say is definitely different this week. We have a significant number of ports that aren't covered. So taking a look at the most sources probing. So this is the number of IPs that's attempting to scan these, and the other one was the number of scan, packets that you're seeing in flows. 23 TCP again is at the top of that list. 445, which I think was on 4th place on the last screen. Yeah, 4th place is actually in 2nd place in terms of sources probing. And if you're familiar with WannaCry, that makes a lot of sense because that is the port used by the worm, and worms tend to generate a lot of traffic and they spread. So the number of sources will continue to go up. And we actually see that it continues to grow, that population. 80 TCP we've talked about before, 21 and 22. 5358 is another IoT-specific vulnerability, and that one's been in the top 10 for a while, although you can see it's gone down 4 spots.
It is interesting to see that more of these IoT devices have open ports, and that's being scanned for, right? Because I think so far when we talk about security, with IoT devices, you do sort of not think about them as part of your network and don't really do vulnerability assessments on them. You're not really checking for unnecessary open ports and services running on them. But this clearly shows that the hackers are out there probing for it.
I think everybody should
Yeah.
really treat them. I mean, honestly, they're embedded Linux devices in most cases. They are real computers. They are configured from the operating system side like a real computer. It's just people look at them and say, it doesn't look like a beige box or a thing that sits in a rack, therefore I don't think of it the same way in my threat model.
Yeah.
But people really ought to be doing that.
I'd say the fact that still Telnet and FTP remain at the top goes to show that a number of devices still have this open. Really look at all your systems and close off these insecure ports and services when they're not necessary to be used. You have more secure versions to use. So don't leave Telnet open.
So this is a 365-day view of port 1433, which is MS SQL. I was kind of curious as to what we'd seen in the past. I've noticed that in the last couple of months, we were really seeing a significant increase in it. And back in maybe a year ago today, it was around 50 million scan flows per hour. Now we are up around 250, and we've had peaks around 600 million scan flows per hour. So somebody's interested in this port in a big way.
Yeah, it almost leads me to think, they're looking for tons of personal information, sensitive information in databases that are exposed, right? So folks collecting data, keeping them in a SQL database, running analytics over it, but not really securing that database. It's open, it may not have credit card information, so they might think, oh, nobody wants this, right? This is just data that I'm collecting, let's say, about a spending habit, about a drug, and research around it. People may not be interested, but now every piece of information is valuable. So you don't get to determine what is valuable, somebody else does, right?
So, and no matter what it is, if it's valuable to your business, people can either hold it for ransom if they're able to encrypt the database, or they can threaten to release it, which I think we've seen in a couple of those in the last couple of months, where it's, no matter what it is, it seems to be across different organizations that they've got the database, now that they got access to it, they're holding it for some sort of ransom.
And what is really neat is the fact that we have this view, right? We've collected data over the years and we can see this pattern, and especially port by port. That is amazing.
So this is scan sources on port 9000 TCP, and this is related to an IoT vulnerability that we've seen in the past. And this is a 150-day view. I didn't want to go quite back to 365, but we did see a huge spike of it in around May and June. It dropped off suddenly, no explanation why. And then at the start of September, we saw a smaller spike, and now we're seeing it trend back upwards again. So I tend to think when you see a small isolated spike like that somebody is sort of testing the waters.
Yeah, it's almost like they took a sort of a holiday break, and then you're back on it.
Well, I'm not sure that it's the same people. That's the thing. It's not obvious that this is the same botnet.
Yeah.
This one definitely took off like a rocket out of nowhere, decided doing their things. Whoever's over on that side seems to be testing before they go full bore on that scanning, which is interesting.
Yeah. I'd be curious to see how this one evolves.
Port 5358, scan sources there. We did see a big uptick recently in that as well. I think that died off at one point, and now it's back again. But in the last week or so, we really have seen it drop back off, and I'm wondering why. It's another IoT bug. And we've seen ups and downs with port 9000, like we showed before.
Correct.
And maybe these guys have just moved on to other greener pastures. It's hard to say. And I think this is potentially the end of interest in this bug, at least from this. If this is a single botnet, then yes, I think they're moving on. This is port 445 TCP, the number of scan sources. I picked this because this is still in the top 10, but also typically I associate this kind of scanning with WannaCry, scanning for the Eternal Blue, Eternal Romance set of bugs. And ever since WannaCry has been released, this scanning has consistently gone up day after day.
Yeah, this is to show that, it is still out there, right? So basically, even though WannaCry was released, we think, from a security day, another vulnerability, another patch, move on. Most organizations, interestingly, have still not been able to, deploy patches on all of their devices. They've done it probably on critical systems, but then it depends on how their network is architected to push these patches out, right? So.
And it's incredible. Some of us think of it maybe not as a solved problem, but as a problem that we've got at least handled for now. There's still some problems there, and every once in a while you'll find another machine that's been infected by this. But you can see the spikes here. I tend to think that that's like a daily pattern up and down. So there's a baseline of machines that seem to stay on all the time, but there's spikes, and I think on a there's about 7 of them in every weekly range. So
Yeah,
I tend to
it's
think
all in
those are
an
machines
upward.
coming up and being powered on for the day,
Yeah.
and then being turned off at the end of the day, and so on and so forth, which is interesting to see.
Yep.
And this one was one that I hadn't seen in a while. I went back into the top 20 list, and I wanted to see what had happened to this old chestnut, because 53.413 we used to talk about all the time on the show.
Yeah.
That was a UDP backdoor in Netis devices that was being used to just you send a single UDP packet and it throws a whole payload in there. I thought it was interesting to revisit that Netis router bug that we had seen for so long and had no longer really been in the top 10, but to see that it's still cruising somewhere in the top 20 in those reports is interesting. IoT bugs seem to have an interesting ebb and flow lifespan where they'll be very hot for a while, fall off the radar, and then come back again for some reason, fall off the radar. And I wish I had an explanation for it, but I don't. And this is, by the way, a 365-day view. Back at the start of the year, this was definitely a hot target, but it's definitely gone down to, if we average that, around 80 million scan flows per hour. So no longer as interesting a target, but it still hasn't quite gone away. So I'm not sure what to make of that. Maybe someone has still got interest in this, or maybe they've just left their botnet going, without changing the ports in, but who knows? That's that. It feels this week like we have certain situations that aren't easily addressable by the end user. And it's frustrating, but it's a reality of security sometimes. I mean, to fix a problem that affects a wide range of devices or a wide range of machines, it's a big effort. A lot of times we're very happy to say that absolutely the people who are responsible for fixing this code or this device have done the legwork and we're going to be fine. This week I really can't say that.
As we are seeing the threat patterns change, the motivation of the attacker is changing across the threat landscape. The who is changing, the why is changing, the what and the how is changing.